Hey there, AP Environmental Science class. Welcome back to part 3 of my lecture on Chapter 18, Solid and Hazardous Wastes. We're going to move on now and begin discussing how should we deal with hazardous waste. Well, as you know, we need a sustainable approach to hazardous waste. Number one, we need to produce less of it. Number two, we need to reuse or recycle it. Number three, we need to convert it to less hazardous materials. And number four, we need to safely store what is left. So as you can see, especially the first two there, basically that's the story for all our waste, right? We got to produce less of it, and we need to learn to reuse or recycle what we have produced. Okay. So again, when it comes to hazardous waste, again, pretty much the same type of stuff we spoke about when we spoke about with the solid waste, with the MSW, that municipal solid waste, right? We just got to produce less of it and reuse and recycle the stuff that we do produce. When it comes to hazardous waste, we need to convert it to less hazardous material, and then we need to safely store what is next. So what is left? So hazardous waste requires special handling. Okay, different than the MSW, that municipal solid waste that we recycle or throw out in our garbage cans. When you're talking about hazardous waste, obviously it does require some special handling. So again, best practices: produce less or convert as much as possible to the less hazardous substances, and again, put the rest in some kind of long-term safe storage facility. So again, here we have integrated hazardous waste management. All right, the U.S. National Academy of Science has suggested these priorities for dealing with hazardous waste. So again, produce less waste, number one, or at least less hazardous waste. Change industrial processes to reduce or eliminate hazardous waste production, and then recycle and reuse any hazardous waste that has been produced. Okay, so manufacturing companies, manufacturing plants need to figure out a way to reuse and recycle the hazardous waste that they have produced. Second one was convert to less hazardous or non-hazardous substances, either through natural decomposition, through incineration, through some kind of thermal or temperature treatment, maybe through a chemical, physical, or some biological treatment. Okay, like in our secondary sewage, right, where we have the sewage plants in the secondary treatment, where you use chlorine or UV to get rid of some of that hazardous material. Dilution in air or water, so actually dilute the hazardous material to make it less hazardous. And then the final thing is put it in some kind of perpetual storage where it will stay forever, either in a landfill or in underground injection wells, maybe in surface impoundments or in underground salt formations, which can also help store that hazardous waste. So again, an integrated hazardous waste management, definitely understand the three here: produce less, convert to non-hazardous, and then put in some kind of storage where that hazardous waste can stay for the long term. All right, so another case study, recycling e-waste. I've kind of spoke about this a little bit, but it's good to talk about it again. Again, what is e-waste? That's your electronic waste, like computers, like cell phones. Again, much of the world's e-waste is shipped to China, where people work in hazardous working conditions, including child workers. The United States produces roughly half of the world's electrical waste, or electronic waste, e-waste, but recycles only about 14% of it. 13 states, manufacturers are responsible for recycling electronic devices, so we are beginning to at least head in that direction. Again, e-waste is rather new, okay, really only been with us maybe for the past 20 to 30 years. Is it really now becoming a problem, this electronic waste? So we're just starting to come up with ideas to curb it, and at least 13 states right now do have some laws on the book that requires manufacturers to recycle electronic devices. Here's a tough picture to look at, okay? This is in Dhaka, Bangladesh. This is a little girl recycling batteries. Basically, she's hammering these batteries apart to take out the tin and lead that can then be sold. And again, obviously, you can tell not only are the working conditions dirty, but they're hazardous. She's working in toxic batteries. Look at that. So again, this is kind of tough to see as a father of a daughter who is 12 years old. This is tough. All right, tough to see this, because I don't think you would want your daughter working in an environment environment like this. So again, we need to figure out how to help these underdeveloped nations recycle these batteries. Doesn't mean that we can't have recycling plants in Bangladesh. Doesn't mean that these folks can't maybe help recycle and help make some money for their families, but we need to do it in cleaner and more humane conditions for them. All right, so how can we detoxify hazardous waste? So collect and then detoxify, either through physical methods, chemical methods, by remediation, or by psycho remediation. All right, so we'll talk about this as something also called plasma gasification, which basically uses as incineration using a plasma arc torch, which is another way that we can detoxify hazardous waste. So we'll talk about that a little bit more about this plasma arc. So again, just understand physical methods, there are chemical methods, there's some biological methods that we can use here. What is a plasma arc? What's the advantages? Well, there you go. That's what we're looking at here. All right, it's kind of this this plasma coming out of a tube. Advantages: produces a mixture of CO, so that's carbon monoxide, and H2 that can be used as fuel, okay, because you can kind of combine them together to produce a little bit of water that could produce some fuel, some hydrogen fuel, excuse me, and then water would be what comes out as a byproduct. Okay, so you can take that carbon monoxide and the H2 and kind of basically use it to get some of the hydrogen ions to be able to use as fuel. It's mobile, so it's easy to move to different sites, and it produces no toxic ash. Disadvantages: very high cost. It does produce carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, which obviously are pollutants for the atmosphere. Can release some particulates and some chlorine gas, and can vaporize and release toxic metals and radioactive elements. All right, so again, always your advantages and disadvantages, but plasma arcs basically very new. A new way to detoxify hazardous waste. All right, so just something to think about. All right, storing hazardous waste. So burial on land or in long-term storage. This right now is the most widely used method today due to its low cost and due to the fact that we've had landfills around for many generations. There's something called deep well disposal, where we put these hazardous waste way down into deep wells, seal the wells, and then hope for the best. You got surface impoundments. This is lined ponds or pits or lagoons. And what we mean by lined is lined on the bottom with either something that is not permeable to water, maybe clay or maybe some kind of fabric or some kind of plastics that we have created. Basically, the key is you don't want water leaching through the hazardous wastewater leaching down into the groundwater. So you need these lined ponds, pits, or lined lagoons that can help trap that water. Securing hazardous waste landfills, however, are expensive. All right, so this is one of the main issues we're coming across when we deal with storing hazardous waste. So deep well disposal, again, this is where we pump the stuff down, way down into the ground. Advantages: safe if sites are chosen carefully. All right, waste can often be retrieved if we have to, and the cost is rather low. Disadvantages: leaks can occur from corrosion of the well casing, and that would obviously then leak the toxic substances into your groundwater. Does emit some carbon dioxide and other air pollutants. And the output approach that it actually, again, encourages waste production because it's basically a way to store waste. So it encourages it. It encourages waste production because we have a place to store it. We want to try to discourage waste production somehow. Surface impoundments. Again, you need to kind of know this, guys, your advantages, your disadvantages to these different types of ways that we store hazardous waste. So again, please have a few of them in mind. So talking about surface impoundments, again, these are your lined lagoons, your lined pits or whatever, low cost. Waste can often be retrieved if needed and can store waste indefinitely with those secure double liners. Disadvantages: obviously, water pollution occurs from leaking liners and overflows. Air pollution from volatile organic compounds will be possible because, again, you're at the surface here, so any volatile compounds can get out into the air. And once again, output approach that encourages waste production because it is a rather low-cost way to store hazardous waste. So folks say, hey, we can do it here cheaply. Let's just produce more hazardous waste. And again, we're trying to discourage people from producing hazardous waste. So what can you do when it comes to hazardous waste? Well, avoid using pesticides and other hazardous chemicals, or use them in the smallest amount possible. Use less harmful substances instead of commercial household cleaners. For example, use vinegar to polish metals, clean surfaces, and remove stains and mildews. Use baking soda to clean utensils and to deodorize and remove stains. Do not dump pesticides, paints, solvents, oils, antifreeze, or other hazardous chemicals down the toilet, down the drain, into the ground, into the garbage, or down storm drains. Free hazardous waste disposal services are available in many cities. I know my town over in Airmont, Rockland County, once a month or once every other month, there's a date where a truck comes around and picks up any hazardous waste that you have. So again, and it's free. And it's free. I mean, it's not free. I'm paying for it in the $18,000 a year in taxes that I'm paying for my property in Rockland. But obviously, I don't pay any additional fee for having hazardous waste out there. So again, sometimes just dispose of it in your city, in the place where it needs to be disposed. Do not throw old fluorescent light bulbs, which contain mercury, into the regular trash. Many communities and home product retailers offer free recycling of these bulbs. So again, just things that you can do to store or reduce the hazardous waste that needs to be stored. And once again, definitely have a few of these in mind as you head into the test coming up in May. All right, case study here talking about hazardous waste regulation in the United States. So first off, we started with the Toxic Substance Control Act. Then in 1976, we had the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, known as RCRA. Here, the EPA sets standards and gives permits. Again, this is a cradle to grave, all right, type of a regulation, which we're trying to get away from, all right? We want that cradle to cradle, but at least it does help something, and it covers only 5%, however, of hazardous waste produced in the United States. But basically, the EPA sets standards, gives you permits to basically get rid of your toxic substance. But again, it's cradle to grave. It's not reusing the hazardous waste in a way that we need to start moving towards. And again, it only covers about 5% of the hazardous waste produced in the United States. The other 90%, 5%, not under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. In 1980, the Comprehensive Environmental Compensation and Liability Act, called CERCLA, was implemented. Basically, had a national priorities list. This is basically of areas that have been areas that have toxic waste, that have chemicals there. Basically, it was a compensation and liability to basically make companies liable for the hazardous waste that they have dumped. And basically in 2016, there were 1,323 of these Superfund sites, with only 391 clean. So there is a national priorities list. And again, think about it: Comprehensive Environmental Compensation and Liability Act. It's basically these places. They're called Superfund sites that have been toxic dumps for for companies for years, in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. Now you have the toxic waste from these dumps leaking into groundwater, polluting the environment. And so this basically this in 1980, this CERCLA law, basically regulation, basically now holds companies liable for pollution they may have done years ago in the past. Unfortunately, the pace of cleanup has slowed as funding has been discontinued, and laws encouraging the cleanup of brownfields. Brownfields are abandoned industrial sites. We also have some laws that encourage the cleanup of those abandoned industrial sites that we call brownfields. So I'm going to give you a little story here. And hopefully not tear up. I usually tear up when I tell this story, but in my hometown of Ringwood, New Jersey, which is just about 25 miles across the Hudson River from here, all right, not too far away from Ardsley, there is a Superfund site, because back in the Ringwood mines, all right, so just a brief story: Ringwood back in the 16 and 1700s was a big iron mine producing area. So there were a lot of iron mines abandoned in the woods and in the area of my hometown of Ringwood over in Harriman State Park. You can actually hike to some of these iron mines if you want to. Well, Ford Motor Company thought, which was actually in Mahwah, New Jersey. I believe they still are in Mahwah, New Jersey. So that's the town right next door to my hometown of Ringwood, New Jersey. Decided in the 60s and 70s that they were going to use some of these old abandoned mines to dump their toxic chemicals into, their toxic waste, right? Because, hey, we have these mines in the ground. No one's using them anymore. Let's just dump the chemicals in there. No worries. We'll throw something over the top. Again, these mines weren't lined. These mines had no way of keeping the toxic chemicals in the waste. They all started to seep into the groundwater. And now here we are 40 years later, and people that I went to elementary school with are getting cancer because they lived in this area of these Ringwood mines, not knowing, not understanding that Ford Motor Company left all this hazardous waste in the ground that has since seeped into the groundwater and into the drinking supply and into the soil. And so I have friends of mine in my 40s that I went to elementary school with that have cancer and are dying. And it's all because of this. So it's not fair. Unfortunately, though, life isn't fair. You're going to learn that. I remember someone telling me fair is where you go on a pony rides and eat apple pie. That's a fair. Life is not fair. All right. But the Ford Motor Company has since, it became a Superfund site. And in the past 10, 15 years, they have been held liable. And they are now beginning to clean up the site. And they're beginning to pay some reparations to my friends. To my friends who I grew up with and who still live near the Ringwood mines. So again, you hear about these stories on TV. You think they're distant from us here in Ardsley. I'm telling you right now, they're not that distant. Okay, so something that we need to know, and I know that's why most of you guys are in this class, because you understand the problems here and you care. And that's why I think you guys are great. All right, moving on. All right, before I get too emotional here. Okay, so again, here is hazardous waste can be isolated and stored in a secure hazardous waste landfill. Again, this is not happening in the Ringwood mines. That's why it has become a Superfund site. Okay, but again, what do we have here? Just take a look. Here's your water table, right? Here's that impervious clay layer, right? Here's your waste. Here's your gas vent. All right, topsoil, plastic cover. Okay, you have a leak detection system so that if you do get some leaks out there, we can deal with it quickly. You have a groundwater monitoring well, looking at the groundwater, making sure so that the minute it gets polluted, we know it. Ding, 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 alarms go off, and we go in there and we deal with it. All right, you got your plastic double liner. You got your double leachate collection system. Again, that any water that does hazardous water that does leach out is collected before it gets into our groundwater. All right, so this you can do. All right, it can be isolated and stored in these secure waste landfills. And again, that's what we need to create if we're going to keep creating this hazardous waste. We should create less of it, right? But if we're going to have it, we need to store it, and we need to store it in facilities like this, because what we don't want is this, right? Leaking barrels of toxic waste. This is not what we want to see. Okay, and unfortunately, though, we're seeing a lot of this around in these Superfund sites and in these brown fields, right? These abandoned industrial sites. This is what we're getting, and this is what we have to clean up and what we have to deal with. All right, so how can we shift to more of a low waste economy? Again, that's really the key here, right? The key is to produce less waste. Like, it's so hard, yet it's so simple, right? All right. So requirements for shifting to a low waste economy. Number one, reduce our resource use, right? We don't use as much. Here we go again, our R's, right? Reuse and recycle most solid and hazardous waste, all right? Try to reuse it, try to recycle it. More of that cradle to cradle approach rather than our cradle to grave approach. But this must happen at local, national, and global levels. And usually, guys, it happens locally. Usually this kind of stuff goes from the bottom up. All right, so grassroots up to the top, that's where it has to go. Citizens like you can take action, and me, all right? Many citizens have acted to oppose construction of incinerators, landfills, treatment plants, and chemical plants. Again, this is that environmental justice we spoke about in part two, I believe, of this lecture. Argument, something must be done with hazardous wastes, okay? The counter argument, focus on producing less. So again, something must be done with the waste, but the counter argument is let's not even have to deal with it. Basically, nothing has to be done with hazardous waste if you don't produce hazardous waste, right? Right? So that's kind of the argument and the counter argument there, all right? And that's where we need to head. So using international treaties to reduce hazardous waste, again, just some of these treaties you need to know of, all right? Just have a general understanding. You saw on the last FRQ quiz, you had to identify. That's really what you have to do. You never really have to talk a lot about these treaties and these laws. Just know when you need to identify them. So 1992, the Basel Convention bans participating countries from shipping hazardous waste to other countries. In 2000, we had the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants, okay, which basically we talked about these POPs in a previous lesson, but basically regulates them and puts a bullseye on them. 2020. Which was just a few years ago here, actually just about a year ago, Sweden actually banned of hazardous chemicals will become effective. This places a burden on industries to show chemicals are safe, all right? So that's what they started in Sweden just last year, all right? And again, that's where we need to head, right? Instead of you need to place the burden on the industries to show that they are safe, not the other way around. Right now, it's kind of the other way around, unless they're proven, they've been proven to be hazardous. There's no regulation. Well, in Sweden, it's flipped. Okay, basically, if they're not proven to be safe, then they're hazardous. Okay, and we need to do that a little bit more in this country and in other countries as well. So once again, talking about back to the beginning here, right? Everything comes full circle. So talking about encouraging that reuse and recycling, factors that hinder reuse and recycling, market prices that do not include the harmful costs, right? We spoke about that over and over and over again in this class. All right, if we can include the environmental degradation that occurs into the price of our products, the price of our products will go up in many cases, and that will hopefully encourage people to use less, right? But we don't do that, all right? So that hinders reuse and recycling. The economic playing field is uneven, right? That environmental justice, some people are poor, some people are rich, so some people can do this better than others, all right? Demand for recycled material fluctuates, okay? And again, that's because we don't have a setup where we are reusing and recycling. So sometimes maybe there's more recycled materials needed, sometimes less, and so that again hinders the recycling because here we go, if you recycle it and then you don't need it, then we end up throwing it out, right? So we need to keep that demand for the recycled materials up. Need to keep that demand high. Governments can increase subsidies for using recycled materials, all right, and require governments to purchase recycled products, all right? That's another thing that we can do to encourage a reuse and recycling. And again, that fee per bag waste collection system we talked about, okay? You produce a bag of garbage, you get charged. You produce 10 bags of garbage, you'll get charged 10 times, all right? So that could encourage reuse and recycling because if you're paying for your trash, you're paying for that waste collection. Well, again, it'd be cheaper maybe to recycle or reuse the product instead of throwing it out to the trash. Yard sales, secondhand stores, eBay and Craigslist, all right? These actually present economic opportunities for citizens like you or I. And there are also other, I'm drawing a blank right now, but I know there's an app where people sell used clothing, right off of their shelves. They take pictures and you sell your used clothing, right? So a great idea, all right? Instead of throwing the stuff out, I'm dreaming. There's a line in a Grateful Dead song that I love. I'm trying to think of it. One man's it's talking about how one man's spillage is another man's drink or something like that. Basically, it talks about one of their songs and basically says one man's waste is another man's treasure, right? So something that I don't want, you might want. So instead of throwing it out, maybe selling it, right? And that could bring some money to me. You get the product cheaper. We reuse it. We recycle it. It's a win-win for everyone. You, me, and Mother Nature. Free cycle network, another way to kind of use this stuff, and upcycling. Again, we talked about this, recycling material into products of higher value so you can actually make more money by upcycling some of these materials. So again, these are some economic opportunities that are presented to us when we reuse and we recycle. So making the transition to that low waste economy, zero waste movement. Some restaurants, corporations, and others have dramatically lowered their waste outputs. Again, key principles here: everything is connected. There is no away. All right, everything is right here. Producers and polluters should pay for this. All right, again, and we can mimic nature by reusing, recycling, composting, or exchanging. All right, and that's the whole idea. And here we go. Industrial ecosystems, a case study, copying nature. This is where we need to head. All right, guys, we need to mimic nature. You know, we spoke about this in part 1, how nature really doesn't have any waste, right? Nature reuses everything, recycles everything, puts it back into the environment. It's only since we've showed up, human beings, that now we have all this waste we have to deal with. So we need to start mimicking nature a little more. Resource exchange webs, all right? Waste as raw materials. Again, these eco-industrial parks. We'll talk about that in just a second. Two major steps of biomimicry. What is biomimicry? When you copy nature, right? Mimic biology, mimic nature, okay? And this applies to human industrial systems. So what are we talking about here? This is basically a industrial ecosystem in Kalundborg, Denmark. All right, I don't know if I have that right. Basically, the waste of one business becomes the raw material of another business. And again, this mimics nature. So you'll notice the electric power plant in the middle. All right, waste heat goes into fish farming. All right, the waste heat goes into a pharmaceutical plant to heat it up. Heat greenhouses, heat an oil refinery, all right? The oil refinery has surplus sulfur that goes into a sulfuric acid producer, right? Surplus natural gas goes into a wallboard factory, all right? You'll notice waste heat goes into area homes here. Fly ash goes into cement manufacturing. You'll notice the sludge from the pharmaceutical plant goes to local farmers that they can use as some kind of fertilizer, etc., etc. Again, this is mimicking nature. All right, this is called industrial ecosystems, and this basically is that cradle to cradle approach that we need to get to when it comes to waste. None of the waste here is put in the grave. None of the waste in these industrial ecosystems are thrown away. The waste is reused and recycled, and as a result, you have that cradle to cradle design that we are striving for. All right, so that ends my part 3 and my entire lecture on chapter 18, solid and hazardous waste. And as always, thanks for listening.